Hello and welcome to this Piano Mythbusters video about the value of scales and arpeggios. There is a common misunderstanding amongst teachers and pianists that scales are the most important and perhaps the only way that we need to practice technique. Is this true? I'm Penelope Roskell. I'm director of the Roskell Academy. I'm also a professor of piano at Trinity Laban Conservatoire and the chair of the European Piano Teachers Association. I've written many books, including The Complete Pianist, and a book about the fingering for scales and arpeggios. So I'm not somebody who takes scales and arpeggios lightly. I think there is some important value in learning them. For instance, when you're learning pieces, they're all based on a key structure, on a scale, on harmonies, which underlie all of Western classical music. And when we're learning the scales, we're preparing for the understanding needed to play those pieces. So, for instance, if you come across an E-flat scale in a piece of music, you will know it. You will know the notes. You'll know the fingering. And all of these are embedded in your memory as you've practiced them. So as you come to learn a new piece, maybe several years later, you'll remember that fingering, you'll remember the notes because you've learnt it so thoroughly. So there is an advantage to learning these scales and arpeggios and becoming really familiar with them. And they can, to a certain extent, be a useful medium by which you practice agility and finger touch. But let's just stop and think for a moment about a scale, and especially which fingers are being used. So, for instance, here, if I'm playing a D major scale, it starts with 1, 2, 3, and then another 1, 2, 3, and then a 4, and then a 1, 2, 3. So, if I was to play a 4-octave D major scale, my thumb and second and third finger would play 16 times within that scale. The fourth finger would play 8 times, and the fifth finger would only play once at the very top of the scale. So as you can see, these scales are not exercising all the fingers equally. So if you are practicing scales, and that is maybe at the moment your main focus on technique, then I would strongly recommend that you also supplement that with some finger strengthening exercises for fourth and fifth finger. So what you can do, for instance, is rest your hand and then just so that your arm is really relaxed, because you don't want to be trying to strengthen the fourth finger with a very tense wrist and arm. So you want your arm to be relaxed, and so you can just put your hand down and then just wiggle your fourth and fifth finger. It's best to do it from this joint and just let it move. It may seem like a really too easy exercise, too simple, but actually it's very powerful, because what it does is it strengthens the intrinsic hand muscles that are in here, which give fingers strength and independence and also help to maintain the hand arch. So you don't find yourself, leaning over because you've got a weak joint here. Now, the other problem with scales and arpeggios is that most people see them as a rather boring part of their practice. They do them at the beginning of the day and find them rather boring, so they just skim through them. They're not really very focused. They play them perhaps with a rather ugly sound, and it's rather mechanical sort of practice. And then, as soon as possible, they move on and practice their pieces. But the trouble with practicing scales and arpeggios in that way is that you develop a habit of every time you come across a scalic passage or an arpeggic sort of passage, you might start to play it with that rather aggressive finger touch and perhaps rather inexpressively. So it's really important when you are practicing scales and arpeggios to always aim to practice them as expressively as you can. So for instance, If I'm going to be playing a 2-octave scale, I'll think about just dropping very comfortably and with ease onto the first note. I call that the parachute touch. And then from there, I'm thinking of one smooth flowing line going up to the top D. So I'll do it like this. And then one flowing line coming down. If I want a scale that's just going up and down, I will always practice it with a rounded movement, so my arm is going and expressing the shape of the scale. So it'll go. And there's a little bit of a crescendo and a little bit of a diminuendo to make it feel more like an expressive phrase. So, are we then just going to practice scales and arpeggios? And my answer to that is a resounding no. Because let's think first about what is technique. And technique, to me, means all the skills that a pianist needs to learn in order to play music really beautifully. And so, what other techniques do we really need to learn alongside those scales and arpeggios? Firstly, we want to be able to create a beautiful sound. We want to be able to create beautiful phrases, play expressively. We want to be able to balance the sound and have control over that tone quality. And these are what gives our playing real expression. As I said before, we want a good hand shape. However, without feeling that we're tensing up our wrist and our elbow and our shoulder. So we want a really supple arm, but without the hand sort of collapsing in these sort of awkward shapes, which I call squash spider position. So we want a nice, natural hand shape with supple wrist and elbow. And these all take time to learn. The other really important thing is that we need freedom of movement, because we cannot play fast unless we've got flexibility, suppleness, which will allow us to move quickly and freely around the keys. So there are 5 different movements that a pianist needs to learn. Firstly, we depress the key. So we move up before we play the key, and then we play down onto the key. So we have a natural up-down, which we don't want it to be tense or pushed. So that is what I said before, was I just use the parachute touch, where we lift and then we feel we're parachuting down onto a note. And there's no harshness or pressure or tension. We're using gravity. Another movement that all pianists need to learn is sideways movements. So, for instance, moving across the keys in this way. And in order to do that, we have to have quite a relaxed elbow. So with all my students, we work quite a lot on relaxing the elbow. And just one very quick way of doing that is just doing these movements. So we're really feeling that we're getting good movement and free movement right from the shoulder across the whole keyboard. Another aspect of technique that we all need to learn is feeling confident about moving forwards and back. This may seem like a strange thing to be talking about, but if you're playing C major, you're likely to be nearer to the edge of the keys. If you're playing in D flat major, you're more likely to be towards the black keys. And so we actually need to feel that we can comfortably move forward and back whenever we need to. And in order to do that, we can't do that if our elbow is really tight. We need some give in the elbow. What other movements have we got that we need to learn? One of them is rotation. Think about the Beethoven Pathetique Sonata. We've got these octaves. And many, many pianists get very tired and tense when they're playing those. So as early as you can within your piano playing journey, you should start to learn a little bit of free rotation movement. And you can do that by just rolling. There's an exercise when I'm teaching children, I talk about flip-flop spider, sleepy spider, wide-awake spider. You just shift between the two, and we get a real freedom of that rotation movement. Very important aspect of technique. And the first one is a little bit about what I was talking about when I played just a 1-octave scale, is a rounded movement. Because most phrases and songs and melodies in piano playing are very rounded. Piano playing doesn't sound very good if it's very flat and straight. And so we want to do. So if we're doing a phrase that's rounded, then we want to make a rounded movement so that the gesture we're making is aligned with the gesture that's naturally within the music. And then, of course, as we go towards more advanced playing, we get more complicated chords, we've got to do bigger stretches, we've got to learn to do that without getting too tense. And we also need to learn to do repetition, for instance, fast octaves, big chords, play with big force. So we need good coordination for that and a lot of flexibility. So, just to sum up, we are looking for a well-rounded technique, not just scales and arpeggios, which produces a well-rounded musician. If you want to learn more, please do join us at the Roskell Academy, where we provide lots of events and guided courses which will help you learn all of these techniques.